So this is the second day of our six-part live panel series on selling MDM to leadership, where we're trying not to be really technical about master data management. We're dealing much more with the organizational issues of how you justify it, how you sell it, how you persuade people that it is something that maybe your company ought to be doing. You build stakeholder engagement and all of those kinds of things. This is, as I said, the second day. Part one was yesterday. I see a good number of people are back from yesterday, which is really encouraging. Thank you for coming back. For those of you who may be here for the first time, the whole series will be published on our website after, well, you'll get a recap with all of the links when we're done with all of them, but in the next day or two, each one of these will start to appear on the website if you want to get a hold of it and get the full context of what we talked about yesterday. Because to some level we are building on day to day on what we talked about, but although it ought to be self-standing as well. So that's what we're here for. Yeah, there we go. So yesterday we talked about organizational readiness, and are you really at the right starting place where you can have a successful MDM implementation. Today we're talking about defining the why. We're going to get into justification, prioritization, and right sizing, picking the right scope for the effort. That should be a good build from yesterday. Tomorrow, Thursday, we're going to get into total cost of ownership calculations, looking at how much complexity should you take on versus the cost of not only owning software, but maintaining it and the organizational backing that it takes to make it function. Next week, we'll talk more about program scope, evaluation pitfalls, and then beyond the first use case, because we've found that start small, think big, but start small is an excellent mantra with MDM. And thinking beyond the first use case, thinking about how you can embed master data management in the the organizational foundation going forward is highly valuable. So that's again where we are. I'll have our panelists introduce themselves briefly. Bill, would you like to kick off there, please?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Bill O'Kane. I'm the VP and MDM strategist at Profisee. I've been with the company for about a year. In my role, I do events like this. I advise our clients and prospects on implementing their MDM programs and also publish some content on our website as well. Prior to that, I owned Gartner's MDM advisory practice for about 8 years. And prior to that, I did about a half a dozen successful, what would now be called MDM implementations, mostly with customer data.
Excellent. And we had some questions on the call yesterday. I should point out, we're not here to sell anything, but Bill and for that matter, Christopher and Harbert are available if people are really interested in going to a different level of detail and have some one-on-one conversation about some of these things. Anybody who's genuinely interested in implementing MDM or people that we're happy to speak to. So, within constraints, we are happy to have follow-up one-on-one type conversations. Christopher, would you like to tell us about yourself a little bit?
Sure. Good morning and good afternoon to anybody overseas. I am Christopher Dwight, and I am Vice President of Customer Success here at Profisee. I've been here at Profisee coming up on 3.5 years. I've been around master data and data management for almost the entirety of my career. So prior to Profisee, I was leading the MDM business for North America at Informatica. Prior to that, I was leading MDM teams at Oracle and helping with Oracle's go-to-market strategy around their portfolio. And prior to that, was one of the founding members of a startup that created some early MDM technology that made it into the Oracle portfolio via acquisition.
Excellent. Thanks, Christopher. And Harbert, do you want to tell us a little bit about value management consulting and BIR and your role in the company?
Absolutely. I'm Harbert Bernard. I lead our global value management consulting practice. We build what we call business impact roadmaps. It's really a quantitative analysis on the investment for MDM, and we identify KPIs and business outcomes and where companies can achieve value.
Super. Thank you. Me, Martin Boyd, VP Product Marketing at Profisee. I've, through Oracle, Silver Creek Systems, and a couple of other places, spent quite a lot of time with master data management and data quality. And I will be the moderator here and try and keep us on track from timing and handle questions and things like that. Just a point also, if at any point in the presentation here that you're looking for some kind of clarity or whatever, please drop a question in the questions box. We'll try and handle some of those things as we go along. Some of them we'll try and handle in our wrap-up session at the end, Q&A, but feel free to drop this in. We're happy to make this as interactive as possible. All right, so today we're talking about defining the why, and the first part of that, building on yesterday's conversation of are you in the right position to start, is program justification. Why should you do anything? I think think of it in terms of Newtonian physics. An object at rest stays at rest unless there's a reason for it to change. So why do anything as opposed to continuing to do nothing? So a lot of conversation around this, and I'm going to have Bill lead off and talk a little bit about how he generally handles that kind of question. And I think there are some support slides here, so let me pop up the first one. And Bill, let's have you introduce this conversation.
Okay, thank you, Martin. So I want to start off by taking the discussion we had yesterday sort of down a level into a little bit more detail, as we said we would. We said we would start with some examples, and under the why on the right side, you'll see where we're driving to. But I want to go back to that initial question, which is quite good and often bypassed as part of this sort of faulty mindset I described yesterday. Why do anything? There are a lot of sort of cynical ways of saying that, we grow 5% a year, we're making money, I still get a paycheck the way things are now. So there's some sort of theoretical universe where the way we do it now is the best way to do it, at least for the foreseeable future. So why, why are we having this conversation? Why do you want to do this? And that's critical because when it gets harder than you think it's going to be, I think everybody here would agree with the statement, your data is worse than you think it is. It's not better than you think it is. It's not going to take half the time you thought it would and half the people you thought it would. So the discussions generally get a little more difficult, and eventually you're going to get that line of discussion of why are we doing this? And that's exactly the same question of why are we doing anything. It's just when you have the question, and bluntly how much money you've spent between those two things. So this list again is critical, and what's critical here is the differentiation of these three columns, particularly the right-hand side one. You'll notice there on the left-hand side there are a couple that mention data. 360 view is a view of data. Segmentation is segmenting data. I had said yesterday, try to state what you want to accomplish without saying the word data, because what we really want to hear are the things on the right side, things like that. And you'll see later on as Harbert goes through the value map a little bit that we use, we can split or subdivide these categories and others into just really, really explicit detail. The how in the middle is the tools you buy. It's the techniques you use from those tools. But again, what's critical here is the difference between these three, because often, even as an analyst for 8 years, I would say, why are you doing this? And I would get the things in the left-hand side. The how is pretty clear. Everybody gets technology, especially in IT, right? But often that what, the stuff on the left side, when you say, why do you want to spend all this money and take all this time? Well, I need to do digital transformation. Okay, well, why do you want to do that? I don't really know. Someone just told me we have to. I routinely take polls when I do in-person events, which I hope to get back to really soon, where I say, who here's responsible for digital transformation within IT? And 3/4 of the hands in the room go up, and then you say, well, who wants to tell me what that is? And literally every hand, as fast as they can, they put their hands back down because they don't want to have to say. So again, I won't go into detail here, and I think everybody recognizes the middle column pretty well. But the trick here is not to let the first column become the third column. And I hope that's clear, and we'll certainly take more time in that as we go along. So Martin, if we can go to the next one. This is a tool that I've developed over the years that sort of helps people, because when we take them through those three kind of daunting lists, a lot of the reaction is we don't think at that level yet. This is a lot of stuff. How do I know where I fit? And I just developed this little tool while talking over the years with people to help them kind of divide up their own thoughts and their own organization's way of looking at things. And I found that it was pretty effective in simplifying these things in order to move forward in whatever way is appropriate. So in the lower left, again, I'll describe the axes first. The horizontal axis is the classic financial axis. Below that line is below the line, saving money, cost efficiency. Above the horizontal line is making money that we're not making, revenue that we're not making today, in whatever way that occurs. The vertical axis is pretty interesting, and it's usually new to most people. The horizontal one isn't. But the vertical axis says to the left of that is fixing things we do now, but that we're not optimal at. We're either inefficient or inaccurate or some other or slow, inefficient. But we can make that better. To the right of that line is where things sort of get interesting in data management. Is what are the things we'd like to do that we can't do at all on the business side? The common ones that come up, and they're not the only ones, but the common ones are cross-selling, upselling. If we have more confidence in the data, we could start up a whole new set of processes that we know about, that we know our competitors are doing, or people in adjacent industries are doing, but we don't dare try that because we would just alienate our customers, or design bad products, or whatever that outcome turns out to be. Now, this is useful because, and I'll tell you again, as I said yesterday, I was the worst offender in some of these things for years, despite how successful I was able to make them. Most good IT people understand business process reengineering pretty well. And what that means is if you stick in the lower left, you'll be able to garner some benefits by fixing things that are broken and thereby saving the organization some money. So you get that cost efficiency by fixing a suboptimal or a set of suboptimal processes. That's real, you should track it. The problem with it in real life is when you add it all up, it's almost never enough to tip the scales in your favor from the stakeholder point of view. I've had literally hundreds of conversations with people over the years that say, I did all that, and it just doesn't look that impressive. It's not enough to make somebody, to Martin's point, to make somebody counter that inertia. What do I do? And that's when I finally ended up coming to this that says, okay, what you really need to do, and why do people stay down there? I'll talk about myself many years ago. That's because you don't have to meet any new people to do that. If you're in IT and you're a bright person, you're an architect, and you know where all the broken processes are, if you can get the ear of a couple of people, maybe even just your IT manager, you can get a little budget put aside and you can fix those things. And you might even be able to buy some software to do it. But eventually it grows in scope, or some other things go on externally, which we'll talk about sporadically in these sessions. External events like M&A, it just doesn't carry the day. So what's the alternative? The alternative is to meet some new people, find the business stakeholders, and literally figure out what that pent-up demand is that's never been communicated to you before. So not things you would know just by going to work every day as a technologist, but gaps, things, people that are sitting out in the business that used to work at other places and say, boy, I used to be able to do this. Why can't I do it here? Why is the data preventing me from doing that? And again, to restate the reason, that's when things get interesting, because almost invariably, your business case will easily tip into positive territory. The benefits will easily outweigh the costs once you get up there. And that's one of the things as you'll see from Harvard today, that's one of the things our business impact roadmap, or BIR process, does, is it pulls those things out in various degrees of difficulty and sophistication, depending, again, on your organization. So this is a way to think about these things, just overall looking at your landscape as maybe a technologist that says, how do I get involved and why should I get involved at this level? And again, it's because you have some real benefits. You might actually have some infrastructure enhancements that are going to be really great. I will just tell you that by the time you get maybe to the second budget cycle, they're going to start getting pretty close to the cost that you're incurring. And you want to be able to really make this a no-brainer, in which in most cases when we do it with our clients and prospects, it becomes a no-brainer. As soon as they see what the capabilities are going forward, it all becomes fine. And the last thing I'll say here is this is so critical that, the most difficult conversations I had over the years with people were, my business doesn't think like that. We just don't have that entrepreneurial mindset. I know what you're saying, and I may have even tried it, but I can't get anybody to talk to me about what we don't do now. They've all been here too long. They never worked for a competitor. What do I do? This is so critical. I've actually asked to speak to those people at some points when I was able to, and say, look, you need to get some business consultants, some outside, not IT consultants, but business consultants that work in your field, to literally scare you and tell you what everybody else is doing, because I can tell you as somebody with that broader view that they are doing things. And doing nothing, to be cliche, doing nothing here is not an option from a business, again, business enhancement and net new process and therefore net new revenue standpoint.
Yeah. So let me ask Harbert and Christopher to follow up on that. And you guys are not analysts, so you do not have to have a 2x2 matrix to support your conversation. But can you just talk about your own experience of how to, where you've seen people do a great job or a poor job in terms of engaging the organization and convincing them that something needs to happen?
I'll jump in on that one. To reflect on the quadrant, I was actually engaged with the client some years ago now. This is probably, I don't know, 5 or 6 years ago. And they had built a justification, but it was all around efficiencies. It was all around improving some processes and getting some efficiencies. And their whole justification was built on full-time equivalent, so based on headcount. And we brought that justification up through the finance team and finally got an audience with the CFO. And the CFO looked at us and said, hey, this is a pile of garbage, because you're saying there's all these FTEs that we're not going to have, but you're telling me that when we implement this and go live in 3 months, there's going to be 17 less cars in the parking lot. And I don't believe it. Right? The reality is you can get some benefits from efficiencies, and maybe you could say, hey, we're going to use that time for some other purpose. But if you don't cross to the other side of the axis, to the right side of the axis, as Bill said, the value savings is kind of hypothetical. If you're going to repurpose those 17 people for something more valuable, you better go define what is the thing that's more valuable. What's the net new process that we're going to be able to do with that freed up headcount? Otherwise, you're going to get shot down, just as we did with that CFO.
Okay, great. Let's move to the next segment here, because I think it actually tees up exactly where we want to go next. Is prioritization, where to start. Now we have, there's a number of ways to do this, of course. We have a pretty strong point of view on a methodology that works, that's embedded in the business impact roadmap methodology. So I'm going to have Harbert kick off here. And Harbert, we had a question a little earlier on the call here about sometimes people, stakeholders get offended by the idea that their data is not good enough, and maybe there needs to be some way of convincing them that there's a business impact and something needs to happen. So maybe you can just incorporate that into your conversation about stakeholder engagement. So over to you.
Perfect. With stakeholder engagement, I'll start.
Kick them off. Sorry.
I'll start there. We try to use data from all the stakeholders, and we try to involve them in the process to go through what a business outcome improvement would look like. And we find, yesterday we talked a little bit about the sense of urgency, the burning platform, and that's a good way to start with trying to get the stakeholder engagement. Part of my background is in organization change management, as is in corporate finance. And I find when you can do that burning platform, you get people to use their data, you're able to cross over and get into the stakeholder engagement and also adoption. To go on the methodology a little bit is, and to follow on what Christopher was talking about, is there are productivity improvements with the MDM. We see that, but we see that when you look at the full business outcomes of something bigger with process, not necessarily with process improvements, but new opportunities are being enabled, things that you're fixing with pain points, or new opportunities are being enabled. We find that that type of analysis registers with leadership and also with stakeholders. We were also talking earlier about think big but start small. And part of this section here is to talk about prioritization. So when we go through the business impact roadmap, what we're trying to do is we're trying to understand the business outcome impact and the size of that impact. And the reason we say think big, start small is you want to be able to show quick wins in the beginning. And you also want to be able to show a kind of a roadmap, a pathway toward how you're going to continue to sustain and achieve more value. And that's the purpose of the business impact roadmap. And what you'll see here, it is you know, as I said earlier, I come from a background in corporate finance, so I love numbers. I think in numbers. I think it's really important to, if you're going to quantify business impact, to bring numbers and financial numbers to the definition of what you're trying to do. So when we do a business impact roadmap, it's quantitatively oriented, where we will look at not only the benefit, but your investment, what your cost of capital is, what we call weighted average cost of capital, what your rates of return are. We also try to identify when you're going to break even. So if you're going to do an MDM, there's going to be a certain, you know, software cost, there's going to be an implementation cost, there's going to be a learning curve cost where you're trying to learn the system, and we factor all that into it. And, you know, we don't try to do, yesterday I was on a call and everyone, you know, we were talking about the business impact roadmap, and the client was like, well, we don't want a dog and pony show from a vendor that's going to tell us that we're going to achieve everything. And I think that's a really fair question. We've designed the business impact roadmap to be a real analysis, a real analytic tool set with your data, with the client's data, to help you make the decisions, to help you prioritize. Obviously, we want to sell software. We're a software company, but we also want to solve problems and, you know, help our clients succeed. And so the business impact roadmap, as I will say, it is a analytical tool where we use real data, with real assumptions, and we try to be conservative, working with our client counterparts on how and what this means to the business. If we can go to the next slide. The methodology follows two, you'll see the value map and what we call the 4 C's of value. And these are two big kind of foundational components to the business impact roadmap. We've talked a lot about business outcomes, and you know, Bill was talking about the 2x2, where you'll have the revenue or the cost efficiency. Well, those can be mapped into a financial statement impact. So when I talk about a real analysis, I'm talking about looking at the impact of financial statements. So is it a balance sheet item? In that case, it'd be assets or something like accounts receivable, something like that. Or is it a revenue or expense type benefit with a business outcome, in which case it'd be income statement or cash flow statement. So when we analyze business outcomes, we take into account the value map components and levels of the value map of how and why value can be created. Yesterday, we were talking about kind of the you know, how 360-degree view of the customer, a single source of truth, isn't a business driver. It's important, it's relevant, but now you're getting into details where you peel back the onion, where you need specifics on how and where you're going to create value, and that's where the why comes in. The 4 C's is you'll see, it starts with calculation, but it's really not just about calculation and a formula. The formula is important, obviously, for the financial estimates and for being able to calculate the impact. You also have to have context. So where does this fit in with the business? What does it mean to the business? What's the relative size of the business? And does the business and stakeholders buy all into it? So this is where you get kind of the context of where it fits into the business after the calculation. And with the connection really is what within the MDM platform, from golden records management to survivorship to harmonization to integration to other data attributes, what's the capabilities and functionalities that you're bringing to bear that's going to help you realize and achieve what you specify with the calculation and context. And finally, you'll see commitment. And going back to that stakeholder engagement, this is where you're able to identify and be able to lock down the commitment from your stakeholders. And as you see, this starts from the beginning with a calculation or problem definition, or you're trying to enable a new opportunity. We work through this methodology. At the end, there has to be commitment from the stakeholders, and that's how we get the commitment. Let's go to the next slide. Here, we were talking earlier about the financial statements, and this obviously, you get the revenue, you get the cost, you have a risk component. So these are areas, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but these are areas, and you'll be able to get this slide deck after we release the session here. These are some areas that we've seen that are good candidates for business outcomes. You know, for revenue, yes, you have the cross-channel and upsell, and you know, things like that. Talking about, you know, where are your customers coming from? You know, why can you achieve a upsell, cross-sell? For example, we're working with a big insurance company right now, and they offer 8 or 9 product lines, and because they have all the product lines as separate systems, they can't easily cross-sell their customers because they can't see who their customer is. So you also have to have a rationale and reason. With cost efficiency, we talked earlier about FTE productivity. That is a component, but we really like to focus on the bigger, more substantial business outcomes. So if you're going to reduce costs, or how are you going to rationalize your vendor base? How are you going to be able to reduce the cost if you have errant shipments, things like that? And there's a risk component to this. Some of our clients in financial services need to be able to underwrite their risk. And one of the problems they have is they can't bring all the data in a real-time attribution to be able to feed their risk models. That's an example of MDM. So let's go to the next slide, Martin. As you can see, is we're quantitative with the business impact roadmap. In addition to being quantitative, we also want to make sure that we've defined the opportunities. And the end result is this is a model, quantitative model, but you also have a delivery of the board-ready output. It's something that a board can look at, appreciate. It's in their language. It's the language of business. We specify if there is a benefit, how you're going to get to that benefit, when you're going to get to that benefit, and it's all documented in a formal high production value presentation. So that's how you prioritize. So if you have 10 opportunities, 10 use cases, or 5 use cases, it doesn't matter. You need to understand the value, the relative value of that use case to your program. And, you have to be able to map that out. And this is what this tool does. It helps you understand what the biggest opportunities are for you, and also what the biggest costs. Sometimes use cases are super complex, and it might take months and months and a lot of effort to get there. That might not be your number one priority. You might want to focus on a simpler use case that might have a reasonable or a value that's related to the more complex use case. So what we do by doing the analysis, you understand at the elemental level, what it's going to take to achieve these use cases, and also what that business impact and relative value from the use cases. And we all put that into the a tool set and a board-ready output deliverable.
Thanks, Harbert. So that was quite a lot of slides. Let's get the conversation back again. So Bill and Christopher, can you talk a little bit about from your perspective, how these BIR analyses work in real life? Well, not that Harbert wasn't talking about real life, but I know you both have perspective on seeing this really done with customers and seeing their reaction to it. And talk a little bit just about how this became a guardrail or a guide point for how to prioritize and build out a roadmap.
Okay, so this is actually, again, I don't want to plug Profisee too much, but this is one of the reasons I joined Profisee was this particular offering that's done as a cost of sale. I think, 80% of the activity I had at Gartner was based around business justification for MDM as opposed to technology. So this is, I always thought this was really a game changer. I'll just say 2 things, and we talk about them all the time. One is, to reiterate from prior discussions on here that we often discover that the cost benefit isn't actually where the folklore of the client or prospect says it is. They come to us and say, I have these 3 use cases that all have to do with customer data, a little bit of location data. So I'm going to go multi-domain, but this is it. Everybody here knows this is the problem. And then we get into it with them, and they discover that they're hanging on to just millions of dollars in parts inventory. That is far more damaging than in terms of sunk cost than anything that's going on in terms of opportunity costs or risk costs with customer. They're still there. Again, all these things are real, and the work to identify them is really worthwhile, but it can be a transformational thing to find out that we really have issues or opportunities that we never knew we had. So that's one area. The other area where this really does a service is the commitment or ratification step, I call it, and the fact that it ends up in a roadmap. The R and BIR is critical for me because it's not just a business case. It asks the people that put these numbers up or helped us arrive at them to say that, yes, that's correct. and then finally build a sequence of events that delivers according to what's going to deliver the most value the soonest and continue to deliver value over the long term. So it's not just a justification, it actually does a couple of other things. And that ratification step also is critical because I said this a million times, it not only gets you going internally, it protects you from external events like an acquisition by saying, look, everyone agreed these are the benefits. If they still are after this acquisition, we should keep going, and that's frequently successful. So again, it could be a protection against a lot of things you have no control over as a program manager or an IT architect.
Excellent. Christopher, do you have a review on how the BIR gets used in?
Sure. Yeah, it's a little bit chiming in on what Bill said, but my favorite thing about this process, and this is not something that's just unique here at Profisee. Other organizations offer these kinds of programs. I feel like we do a particularly good job, but my favorite thing about this process is my gut feel. I don't think I've done any statistical measures. My gut feel is about half the time there are benefits identified that are novel, right, that were not being thought of. As Bill said, hey, we thought it was all about customer, but what we found is when we retire a big piece of equipment in our factory, we don't liquidate all the parts and they sit there and turn into rusty dust when those things could have actually been turned into money. And then it reprioritizes, right? As we talk about this as a roadmap, it's not that the customer issues that were suspect at the beginning of the process have gone away. It's just that there's now a higher priority use case that's come to the surface. And so we'll start there, and then we'll go on to customer as a follow-on phase. It's the fact that maybe about half the time these novel use cases come up and get documented. To me, is both the exciting part of this, but it's also a little bit scary because it says that the organization was potentially going to go down an investment path that would have a lower return on investment or longer time to value. And it doesn't matter which solution or which technologies you apply, it's important to apply them to the right things. And so the fact that the right things are often unknown, so often unknown, to me is like I said, it's exciting when you find those novel use cases, but it's also a little bit scary because you might have been going down the improper or suboptimal path regardless of which vendors or technologies you were to move forward with.
Excellent. And my particular, before we move on to the next topic, my particular take on this, if you look at the quote on the top right there from the CFO of a food processing company, I remember speaking to those folks just after the BIR process had been done for them. They had an original internally built justification, and the CFO had rejected and said, I don't really believe your numbers. We went through our process, which involved a lot of stakeholder engagement, to the point of one of the questions earlier. And so when the information came back the second time, he signed off the whole project because the individual stakeholders had signed up to, yeah, this is a problem I'm experiencing, and this is a benefit that I would get from this if we fixed it. So it really feels like the point of the BIR is to come up with some numbers, but in that case, the more important part was the stakeholder engagement was really what helped them turn the corner in terms of, yeah, these are the right priorities, we're ready to do this, this is the benefit we get, et cetera, et cetera. So
yeah, I think that's, I like the term Bill used of ratification. What that really is in this case, I'm familiar with the same one you're talking about, Martin. The CFO called the plant manager and says, hey, is this real? Do you really believe you can sign up for these savings, and are you willing to sign up and commit to these savings? That's the ratification step, right? And that's when this becomes more than just a set of spreadsheets and a bunch of numbers that are plugged in. It's when the actual process owner says, yes, this is real for my function within the organization, and I'm putting my neck on the line that we're going to actually be able to deliver those results. That's when it becomes real.
Yeah, and in terms of prioritization, you can only imagine how effective that would be if you've got 2 or 3 different use cases, and in one of them, the primary stakeholder says, yeah, I'm all in, and the other ones that are a bit more nervous about it, well, which one would you implement first? One where you have a willing stakeholder and audience, I would think.
And it's not just willing. Often this involves, we talk about business stakeholders. a lot of the time they're going to have to make changes. They're going to have to retrain their teams potentially, or back to the quadrant, implement a new process. So that enthusiasm is important because they have work to do as well.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Before we move off
yesterday, we talked about
sorry, go ahead.
just one thing, Martin. Yesterday, we talked about the Gartner study and the failure rate to get the MDM programs off the ground. And, just what we're talking about, having the commitment and the ratification, that goes a long way toward controlling scope and helping clients succeed with getting the MDM off the ground.
Right. A couple of quick questions before we move off this topic. What percentage of companies do a BIR? More majority or minority? And is there a tendency that this step is skipped if the investment has already been agreed to? And along with that, how long does it take to do a BIR exercise, Harbert?
We see about 50% of our clients wanting to do a BIR now. Over the last 2 months, we're seeing more and more ask for BIR because of the COVID. People really need to justify their budget allocation. We're seeing more and more on that. Depending upon the depth of the analysis, you can do this in 4 or 5 days, or you can do it in 15 days. Not all at once, but just through the work plan. We're finding that kind of the sweet spot is about 6 to 10 interviews, where usually the interviews are about an hour long after you've set kind of the scope of what you're trying to accomplish. And we've been able to do really good BIRs in a matter of less than a week with 3 or 4 interviews. So it does require that the client participate, that they set up the interviews, that they identify those stakeholders. And, once that's done, the actual process of modeling and doing the BIR is not too intrusive. We do ask for data. We're very clear up front because we want this to be a quantitative analysis with real data. And depending upon, the willingness or even how hard it is to get that data, that really is a variable in the complexity and length duration of a BIR.
Follow-up question. How long is it total elapsed time? It's relatively short, I think, right?
It is. I think you can, you need to plan probably a 2-week effort. You're not going to be working 80 hours on this. But, from start to finish, where we submit the presentation, we obviously review findings, we ratify, things like that. I would do about 10 days, give or take, depending upon the depth of the analysis.
Excellent. And you said about half of customers do it. I think it's fair to say that we prefer that everybody does it, right? As we find that there's a high correlation between having done an exercise like this and program success. That's one of the reasons that we do it. It's not just to help the sales process, because we believe that it has a major impact on successful outcomes. The reason not everybody does it is because some people feel like it's a sales exercise by a vendor, and they're just nervous about it, or they feel like they've already done it themselves. So am I paraphrasing that correctly?
You are, and we're very sensitive that this isn't a dog and pony show. We really want to do a real analysis, and we do think it helps MDM programs succeed. We have a lot of existing clients who might have bought our software and are looking back and would like to expand their footprint, and they need to secure the budget, or they need to get executive level support. And we've had a lot of existing clients for 2 or 3 years who come back to us and say, "Can you help us do a business impact roadmap?" Going back to what Christopher was talking about, once you get an MDM in, the ability to innovate and develop novel use cases is infinite. There's a lot of really super interesting use cases that have created just substantial value and differentiation in the market for MDM.
Yeah, I think that's really a key thing here, because we're going to talk next week at the end of this series. We're going to talk about going beyond the first use case. It's great when you find some low-hanging fruit where you can address data problems and realize some benefits. But my favorite thing is to see clients, take MDM and make it a way of life. Take data management and make it a way of life. And then this becomes a self-sustaining program that continues to bear fruit and create competitive differentiation, create genuine business value for the organization. And that's exciting to watch and see. there is a very high correlation, not just to the successful first phase, as we said, but to program success when you invest in this kind of exercise, because it does give you that roadmap. It gives you the plan as well as the justification, and most of all, the line of business buy-in to proceed from step 1 to step 2 to step 3.
And that's actually what digital transformation is, to be honest. It's really nothing more or less than that.
Okay, thank you. So the last area that we want to dig into, to pivot to, just because of timing here, is right sizing. How do you pick the right scope? So at some level, when you've prioritized what your use case is, that will give you some of the clues, but there's some explicit conversation and decision making that needs to happen around data domains, what functionally you're going to need in terms of software, in terms of other types of capabilities, and then organizationally, who do you draw in? How do you set up the scope for success? So Christopher, let's have you talk a little bit about this area, if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah, I'll kick this one off. It's interesting. It's most people, when I engage with them and they say, hey, where are you going to start? Or ask them, where are you going to start with your data management? They usually go to the domain, meaning, hey, we're going to start with customer, or we're going to start with supplier. And so that's the first thing that comes to mind. But the reality is there's quite a few other dimensions that should be taken into consideration. And even when you come out with a business impact roadmap that says, hey, we should start with customer, we should start with asset, even then, you still need to think about, that's not clarity on scope. Right? That's not enough information. That's focus on what we're trying to achieve, but that's not really right sizing to be able to show quick returns and quick benefits. So even that first business benefit that's identified in the roadmap, it may actually, the right approach is often to even slice that into smaller chunks, right? To right size each phase so that you can show some quick wins and results that are going to align to the right outcomes for the organization. So just thinking about domains is certainly not enough. One example, I'm working with a large healthcare provider, and I think most people realize there's been a lot of consolidation in that space. So they are a hospital group that is merged with multiple other hospital groups. And they had clarity. They knew that they wanted to start with provider. But they also knew that as a complex organization that's grown through acquisition, that has different cultures, they even then had to subdivide. They said, hey, we're not going to tackle provider for the entire hospital system. They've got now, I think they have 3 or 4 now EMR systems that are separate. So they said, hey, let's actually take on one of those hospital groups that was part of the acquisition, and let's focus on provider for them. And then, so it's the ability to narrow down that scope and show success. So that's what they've gone off and done, and they were able to deliver value for that first organization around their provider domain. And now that's the fuel to go on and tackle the next group and the next group. So it's super important as you go down this path and you're setting these expectations to leadership that, hey, we've got this business analysis we've done, we've got a roadmap, we know where we're going to start, we know what the focus domain is, but setting expectations to leadership that even with that, we're going to right size this down into bite-sized chunks so we can show progress towards those goals and towards those results.
Super. Let me throw out another way of looking at this to all 3 of you guys, and whoever wants to speak to it can. But this whole idea of think big, start small, and which speaks into justification and prioritization and right sizing and all that kind of thing. What's your experience on how people who think they want to implement MDM normally come to the table? Do they come to the table with a big vision and we have to kind of narrow them down and say, oh, hang on, let's not look at this all at once. Let's figure out which part where should you prioritize and where should you start? Or do they come to the table with a very small scope and our perspective is, well, that should only be your first step along the journey. Let's think about what all the rest are. So can you talk a little bit about just what our experience there is in terms of how people normally come to the table before they've engaged with us?
Yeah, it's ironic because you kind of get both, right? You get people that have a very specific issue that they're focused on, and that's driven them to engage and start looking at data management solutions and technologies. And then the other side of the coin, and I'd say it's maybe 50-50, You get the dreamers, right? The visionaries that say, hey, we've got data all over the place. We've grown through acquisitions. We've got 6 ERPs and 16 CRMs, and we've got this huge data issue, and we're going to take it on and bring world peace. And both of those approaches are actually not likely to succeed. Right? It's too small. You're not going to get over that vertical axis that Bill talked about that gets justification to actually create a data management program. You might get a project underway, but you're not going to be able to take that into a data management program. And of course, we all know boil the ocean is a sure way to fail. And that's where, about, as we're talking through this whole thing today on defining the why, this is what we're about, is you've got to get clarity on what does the entire program look like. That's to think big. But then also, how do I set priorities? And then even within those priorities, how do I break it into chunks? So this whole session today is really talking about a methodology for how you can, if you're starting with that tactical use case, how you can build out a vision and a program. Or if you're starting with a big vision, how you can break that down and set priorities and then break that into right-sized chunks.
Right. Bill, Harbert, any other thoughts on just your experience on do people usually come to the table with a big scope that needs to be cut or a small scope that needs to be amplified?
I've seen both. I tend to, going further back than my time at Profisee, it's usually the former. Back to what Christopher said, it's usually a domain statement. It's we got to get all our customer master data cleaned up. I've engaged dozens and dozens of conversations that start off, okay, well, if you once you do that, what's going to happen? And usually what they discover first is that customer data is not enough. They're going to need product data to do it just by thinking about it. And then what you do is you do the latter. You cut them back to, well, you probably only need some customer data and some product data to get this going. Let's talk about that and then how to expand it. But I would say if you ask me for just a point blank, what's most common, it's usually some domain-based statement. Christopher's right.
Okay.
I would add in one thing. Part of a right sizing, you don't want to use $1 million project to solve a $100,000 problem. So, part of this is understand your value and what you're getting out of the project. So part of right sizing is understand the scale of the problem and what it means to solve it.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely concur with that.
A little bit more into that tomorrow when we talk about how to actually calculate the TCO, but that's a great point. And that's, I think, one of the reasons why this needs to be thought of as a program, because step one has X benefit and Y cost. Step two should have, more benefit and more cost, more likely more cost, but you have to pick the right place to start so that you can then grow and expand on it.
Well, the big problem I've seen is that most organizations think about this, but they don't bring any formality to this process, right? It's as Bill said, they've thought about it enough to say, hey, we got to fix our customer data problem, we've got to fix our vendor data problem, but that's not nearly enough formality to be successful, to both get the program justified, to know where to start and to right size. And so this is really all about making sure that you give the real due diligence to your data management initiative, because without it, it's just a recipe for failure, right? You may get the green light, you may go ahead and even acquire technology, but the likelihood of that technology realizing its ultimate potential is exceedingly low if you take an ad hoc approach to this process.
Right. Going back to the plant and equipment example I always use, you wouldn't start to build another factory unless you knew what it was going to do. And not to scare anybody, but it's easy to spend a lot of money cleaning up data, with or without it, new software. So again, it's not a bad comparison.
And also, you wouldn't want to start with cleanup data being the objective in any case, right?
Right.
Data,
Yeah,
that's your red flag right there. A question that came up yesterday, but it came up again in the Q&A here just now. And by the way, for anybody on the line, we have about 10 minutes. So if you have any other questions, now's an excellent time to type them in. But how often does a BIR result in, we shouldn't do this? The conditions are not right. The use case is not sufficiently compelling. The stakeholders are not aligned. How often does that happen, Harbert?
It happens. There's probably about 10%, give or take, where it happens. I started my career as a management consultant. And so, I know how to read financial statements and really analyze organizations. And, given the cost point of a MDM solution, at least starting small, most instances you'll be able to find that you're at least covering your cost of capital. But there are instances where it just, that someone has a, single platform, ERP platform, don't have a lot of problems with the data, able to, achieve their growth goals, in which case, if it doesn't make sense, we will clearly state that. But very few companies are in the situation where they're not dealing with problems of a complex system architecture and data. But we will go through the analysis and we will highlight that. But 10% is a good rule of thumb.
I would throw another, I said this yesterday, and I'll say it again as a little mini commercial. It's easier to make these things justifiable when you're at a reasonable price point. We're one of the less expensive solutions in the market. And it's harder if you bump up against a multi-million-dollar price tag to say this is worth doing, instead of something much more modest. In our case, where it just becomes a no-brainer, and in fact, it becomes easier to justify buying an MDM solution just to get to that first use case. That's sometimes a challenge, because it's so reasonable that it pays for itself on the first use case. So we have another challenge on our side, which is, we'll talk about it later, getting past that first use case because there was so much benefit in the first one. Don't be satisfied with that. Keep going, because that's where the transformation is, when you keep going.
Yeah, another thing that I've observed in as these things evolve, whatever it takes to get the first justification, and sometimes people don't even think of a full roadmap when they're thinking about their initial implementation, it can evolve. You may have thought of multiple different use cases, but by the time you've implemented the first one and people start to see what the benefits are and they start to feel them, there's very often a need to completely re-evaluate the future questions, because people tend to come forward and say, oh, what you did in that area, could you do that in my area too? And so the conditions change really between the initial analysis and the implementation of the first use case. So this whole roadmap is something that needs to be continually revised and evolved based on market conditions and based on people's confidence and interest in using MDM in their own area.
Yeah, that brings up a great story of mine, Martin. This is from some time back, and this is in the mid-2000s, so this is an older story, but we're talking about taking their MDM solution from being purely analytical, bringing data together for the purpose of doing analytics, and we're talking about, hey, other organizations that we've done this with, the next phase is to go operational. Let's start taking this good data we have and putting it back into the operational systems. And the stakeholders we were working with were all kind of on the BI side of the business, said, hey, that sounds great. Let's bring in some of the operational stakeholders. And they brought them into the room. And they basically said, when hex freeze is over, we will never let you take your data and put it into our operational systems. We are the source of truth. And what was fun about that is, it was literally about a year later, I got a call from our BI stakeholder, a guy named David McAlexander. And he said, Christopher, you won't believe what's going on. The guys finally came on board. They saw all the good data in the MDM solution, and now these operational stakeholders are beating down our door saying, we want that data in our system. So sometimes when you have success, that's where that gratification comes from. They actually see that, hey, the good data is in the MDM tool, not in my operational system. And then there's a whole pivot on scope and priority.
Yep. Hey, we're almost out of time, guys. There's a couple of quick questions I want to respond to from the Q&A. First, Harbert, quick answer if you wouldn't mind. The break-even chart didn't seem to have a break-even on it. Was that deliberate, or can you explain what that was trying to show?
It did. I mocked up data because it was I wanted privacy and confidentiality from one of our clients. So, but it does break even.
Okay, so whatever the graphic showed was a mock-up, and there would in reality be some break-even that says benefit that justifies it.
Absolutely.
Excellent. Quick question, I'll point this to Bill. MDM as part of CDP, Customer Data Platform, vice versa, how does CDP play into the whole justification roadmap, etc.?
Sure. I'll just say first, if you have access to Gartner Research, there's a very good Gartner Research note written by a fellow named Malcolm Hawker on the differences between MDM and CDP. But in a nutshell, CDP is a customer data platform. It's a marketing app that actually not only stores master data, but event-driven transactional interactional data to actually formulate marketing strategies and campaigns. Generally, if someone has both, so the reason there's the confusion is CDPs have started to, some of them, talk about having data quality capabilities on the order of MDM solutions like matching and things like that. I would say that none of them have the total MDM package of stewardship and all of that. They have enough connectors to commonly known data sources for marketing to generate a market. So if you had both, MDM generally has a broader scope. It's got fewer data elements. It's got the master data elements only, but it integrates with more systems across more use cases to add value across a larger swath of the organization. If you have both, it might make sense, depending on the use cases for the CDP to be fed by MDM for the master data. But again, if the use cases are relatively modest and don't require full identification of the customers, that might not even be necessary. Another way to describe, because I see someone asked what a CDP is, to describe it as if you've seen a data management platform for marketing, which it's kind of a de-anonymized version of that to come at it from another direction. But again, there's some data overlap, but the use cases are really dissimilar. And in the case of the CDP, they're much more focused on marketing.
The other thing I would add to that is when you're thinking about, if you're thinking beyond the first use case, it's possible that your customer data and what may or may not be able to be impacted by the customer data platform, if you have one, that may or may not fulfill your first use case, but it's going to put you in a cul-de-sac where you can't get to the second, third, and fourth. It's not going to handle location. It's not going to handle product. It's all the other things that allow you to use MDM as a platform across the business. You're simply not going to get to it. So it's a point solution at best. I'm not saying it has no value, of course, wouldn't say that, but it's not going to get you the broader platform that you may be looking for. So, all right, so we're pretty much at the top of the hour. Let me wrap up by saying that thank the panel, Harbert, Christopher, and Bill, for talking about our justification, prioritization, right sizing in this session here. We already did the questions, so tomorrow, we're going to get into a bit more around total cost of ownership calculation, the solution complexity, and a little bit more of what scope you choose to bite off early or later. Next week, we'll talk a bit more about program scope, how to drive quick wins, which generally drives a little bit more of the enthusiasm flywheel, and evaluation pitfalls. What are some of the things that people sometimes get wrapped around the axle on when they're evaluating? Customer data platforms are very often one of them. And then we'll talk a little bit about this whole idea of the more domains, the more use cases you tackle, the value that you get out of MDM starts to become a little bit more exponential. And we'll talk a little bit about operational versus analytical MDM and some implementation patterns. So that's all we have for today. Please come back again tomorrow. We got a really good return show of people from yesterday today, so hopefully we'll get that again tomorrow. And look for an email with the recordings and such as we go forward. Thank you very much, everyone, for your time, and we hope to see you again for part 3 tomorrow.